Great guy.
Y'all, the planning and zoning committee of October, the order here. I think y'all have all got minutes there if you wanna take a motion on that.
Motion to approve.
Got a motion to approve, we have a second. Second. You have a second, got a motion, second discussion. No discussion. All fair say aye. Anybody from the public want to speak?
Oh, thank you.
Don't have any comments from the public, we'll move on. Tom, you wanna?
Yeah, we have one item on the agenda. Christopher, you were here to hear exactly what they asked for at the Board of Zoning Appeals. But my understanding is the Board of Zoning Appeals, I was away at the last Board of Zoning Appeals meeting due to a medical appointment I had. But, my understanding is the Board of Zoning Appeals expressed a concern that the R1 zone district has a 2-acre requirement, and none of the other zone districts that we allow short-term rental or bed and breakfast in has that 2-acre requirement. And they felt as though it needed to be one way or the other, like all of them have it or none of them have it. I suspect they're probably leaning towards all of them having the 2-acre requirement for short-term rental.
In the future.
In the future. But to do that, you would have to make a motion to amend the language, or to amend the language to include that 2-acre clause that's in the R1 zone district in every district. Did I leave anything out?
No, and that, this came from, they had, I guess heartburn is the way to say, because we have lake lots all over the county. The 2-acre minimum is in the R1, so that covers the majority of the western part of the county. There was an Airbnb, I think it was the Coles Ferry Peninsula, Cairo Bend Peninsula. And it's A1 zone, it's an older lake lot, but it was only 11,000 square feet. And they had an issue with, we've got a 2-acre requirement on the majority of our lake lots, but there was no teeth to deny this one because they met all the other requirements on 11,000 square feet. They just felt that was way too close based on the regulation that was in there to approve one. But this one got approved, and then they directed me to you all to change it, and their first blush was to make it uniform across the county. So that
Came from Bozeman.
yes, came from Bozeman. Regardless of district, they wanted it uniform across the county, whether you make them all 1 acre or make it all 2 acres, what's going with, they didn't care. They just wanted the same rule across the county. And this resolution adds that requirement to A1 and it sticks it in R2 as well, where you currently have some Airbnbs.
The way you've written it up, it's to add 2 acres to all of them, right?
Yes.
The 2-acre requirement to all of them. But you certainly add that up. I mean, what they're after is consistency across zone districts. So you could do it the other way too. You could take the 2 acres out in R1.
But all existing grandfathers.
Everything's there.
Well,
Everything is there now.
no,
It's not true
let's talk about
because-
that. If, under most circumstances, grandfather works, but because of the way short-term rental, if you recall, it has a clause in it that it's finite, like it's approved for a year. It's gotta be approved for a finite period of time. And then if they change ownership under the state law, they have to come back for approval. So,
State law requires that.
yes.
Grandfather.
But
Well, on the short-term rental specifically.
to answer your
What about
question,
anything
if
else,
they came
grandfather?
in
Anything else
before
grandfather?
their time expired, we would
Not-
probably.
well, not necessarily everything, but most things. It runs with the land. For most things, both the grandfather and the Board of Zoning Appeals runs with the land.
But is it fair to say if
But-
they're operating legally now,
As long as it doesn't cessate
not be
for
affected?
certain
If they
period
were
of time.
operating legally now, they wouldn't be affected.
But number 5 is
Sorry.
right.
Because we could make a lot of people
There's
upset.
a big acceptance.
Yeah,
If
you're
they're
operating
operating
legally now, then this wouldn't affect them if they had less than 2
If-
acres. If they were operating
If
legally.
they're operating legally now, I would think that those would be grandfathered until such time as they sell the property. And that's specifically a product of the fact that we're dealing with short-term rentals.
Can we put a line in there, line number 7, stating that?
Well, I don't know that he has to. I think it's assumed, isn't it? By state
It's
law.
always been with all of our other zoning changes.
I'm just saying it'd be the will of the committee when it went forward.
Yeah.
Everything is out there now, his grandfathered, however, all future development.
Well, if you look at section 8, section 5 on the back page, The above listed amendment should take effect upon approval of this amendment. The general welfare of the public requiring it. No part of this regulation shall have any impact on pre-existing use on appeal approvals. So it
Where
goes-
you read, kind of already does that.
Very back page. Bring it all the way up. Put it on.
Yeah, one, that's there.
There you
Oh,
I got a question.
Now, I do have one question regarding that. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So because we have to approve these for a finite period of time, usually what the board has done, just as a practice, is they've approved an initial request. If it met all the criteria for a short-term rental and they were comfortable with it, they would approve the use on appeal request. If it's an R1 district with 2 acres or an A1 with whatever acreage, they would approve the request for 1 year, meaning that the person had to come back in and renew. If there'd been no real concerns brought forward by the public when they come back, or there's no record of law enforcement having to report there repeatedly or anything, and no felonious activity, then they would probably recommend approval for a period of 3 years. If they come back after that period, they would recommend it for 5 years, and then going forward, it'd probably be every 5 years. That's my question though. If we say this has no effect on pre-existing Board of Zoning Appeals approvals, which is who has to approve this, and they have an acre, but they come back in for renewal, that's gonna be a new Board of Zoning Appeals approval. So would they have to have 2 acres?
Technically, but still, they're not uninterrupted.
In that discussion with Boza, they were fine as long as they came back in before it expires. If they didn't let it expire, they would allow them to continue on.
Continue
are
on.
we talking about a vacant?
No, we're talking, what
No,
we're
it'd
talking
be
about
like,
is a short-term rental, so.
full-time
Well, if they let it
management.
expire, that they took it into their own hands when they had to happen, but
Most
it's like Bobby, you don't want to try to put
No,
something in
I
there.
wouldn't put nobody out of business. Most non-conforming use statute, everything is uninterrupted, as long as you continue whatever in every other.
We're in a short-term rental because it's got state law associated with it, is a sticky wicket. From the standpoint of, well, let's just take another example, like, I've thought about one, but like, if somebody does sell it, but the people before have been running a short-term rental in compliance, with the exception of whatever this 2 acre rule might be, do you want to stop the next person from being able to operate a short-term rental based off the 2 acre?
That may be the reason we buy it.
Well,
Yeah.
Do it.
You're gonna run
got
down the
one.
value of everybody's
That's what I
property
mean.
if that isn't the case, because
This is a slippery
so your
slope.
property, you're stuck in.
So the other option is you take the 2 acre requirement out of R1, and then it's consistent the other way.
But you said this is what the Board of Zoning.
The Board of Zoning Appeals has asked for consistency, and I think they were leaning, I wasn't there, but it was your understanding they were probably leaning towards making 2 acres everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Is there a way to do 2 acres and allow continued use even through ownership with a non-conforming use? Is there a way to?
The state law specifically requires that they go back through the approval process.
Yes.
Whatever our approval process is in our county, it has to be the Board of Zoning Appeals. They have to re-up or reapply.
Do you think they could grant it based on whatever criteria, like if they've done it for 20 years, no problem?
I mean, they could. They might have to grant a variance to do it, if they can do it.
You guys.
I got an example. The beer board, beer permits operate if the church is built and then you change ownership.
Yeah.
It's been grandfathered in even though a church is built. So you can still continue to sell beer even under a new owner. So with it, I don't know what the difference would be here. You're giving them a certificate to operate, basically.
Does the new owner
And-
still have to go?
And the new owner may still have to come, but the new owner can take advantage of continuous use of short-term rental.
Could we direct the board of
I
zoning
think-
appeals to interpret it?
I think if the new owner bought it for that purpose and didn't have continued use, we'd be in trouble.
Could we write it into
Why?
our?
Yes, you could write something in the ordinance that says for pre-existing approvals made by the Board of Zoning Appeals, we hereby direct the board to take that into consideration with any renewals.
I think they'd be happy with that.
For example,
thank,
Yes.
got 2 ladies
So
on
I've
the
had
street.
issues with this. So, because I had pre-existing Airbnbs before the state law and before there was, the Airbnb regulations for the county. So it actually does say in TCA that if it's sold, if the property is sold, then it actually still has to go in front of Board of Zoning Appeals. Now, if it was pre-existing, then there's no requirement, and there can't be a requirement for people to go in front of Board of Zoning Appeals. So if you've got, and I'm gonna say this, a party house, because that's what I have in some of my areas where, you know, I mean, an Airbnb that sleeps 20, where they have fraternity reunion parties. So can you imagine living right next door to that? Now, if that owner sells to another person, then that means that the neighbors are always having to deal with that situation for the perpetuity of as long as they're in their house. So if you follow state law, when the ownership changes, suddenly it at least puts it underneath the Board of
Local
Zoning
authority.
Appeals. Right, so that way, in case there is an issue with
They
sleeping
show up
20.
at the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Right, exactly. The Board of Zoning Appeals then has the authority to be able to actually do something about it. If it's grandfathered, then we don't have anything to do.
And,
But,
and what she's talking about there is the state law specifically says anything done before they pass their law that was already in operation is allowed to continue in operation until such time as ownership changes.
right,
So she's absolutely right. We have like I don't know the exact example, but say we have a house that somebody's sleeping an entire Little League baseball team in and their parents, and we got 30 people in a house that's got a septic tank for 4-bedroom or whatever.
right.
That can happen as long as the ownership has to change. When the ownership changes, they are then subject to local authority, which requires them to go to our Board of Zoning Appeals to get approved. And at that point, our board has gotten very good about if it's on septic and not a public sewer system, asking what kind of bedroom approval is it? I mean, they're generally estimating two occupants per bedroom, and that's about what they're allowing. You know, like you can have no more. If you've got a 3-bedroom park, you can have no more than 6 occupants. If you've got a 4-bedroom park, you can have no more than 8 occupants.
Because if not, you end up in court with illegal discharge of sewage, which I've been through that situation too, which is not fun. So if we could prevent that from happening, I just like the ability for us to have some local authority if there's an issue.
But I think in general terms, the Board of Zoning Appeals, just based on the reports I got from Christopher, from the chairman of the board and others on the Board of Zoning Appeals, was they want it to be consistent across zone districts. And I think, based on what he indicated, or what to Christopher, I think they're probably leaning towards making the 2-acre requirement across the board. And I agree, you probably want to put some sort of clause in there with consideration for previously local Board of Zoning Appeals approved, short-term rentals. They would be allowed to continue at whatever acres they would.
Which that always says.
You're next, Freddie.
My question was, are you gonna let the Board of Zoning Appeals just determine like if somebody lets their approval expire? And if they let it expire, then will they have to meet that new requirement?
I think you would if you want to.
I think you have to.
Would be grandfather to let it expire.
We could never keep up with that either.
I think
I don't know how you would ever.
grandfather's for the property, not for the owner. That's what I'm thinking.
Right?
So, under this 2-acre thing, I'm reading this, if somebody's got like a townhome in 5 Oaks, does that mean they cannot use it as an Airbnb under that 2-acre?
They're under city jurisdiction.
There's, okay, well, just a townhome out in the county.
Yeah, we don't,
Well, you got one.
Or like Beacon Hill.
we've got some condominium complexes. We have a couple of apartments that might be townhome type up in the top bottom of Shiloh, above Shiloh Plaza. There's a apartment complex there, a condo complex that's rental. But for the most part, we got Spring Hill townhomes in the county.
What's the
We
definition?
haven't ran into that issue yet.
What's the definition of short-term rental? What's short-term? Weekend or
No,
6
it's
months?
anything 30 days or less.
What about long-term rental?
Long term's anything 30 days or more. or more than 30
I
days.
know what the definition is, but what are the requirements for acreage for that?
There's no,
There's none.
that's just considered a use by right for a residential property. So like you could rent, if you own a house, it's like you own a second house or something, you can rent it out or you can sell it.
I just don't think we have onerous rules for these people to make money from what they give us. I think that's all we do.
Well, if I make a motion to approve this, then in a case where you have a bad operator, and,
Uh-huh.
and it does have to eventually change their hands, go back.
Yeah.
It was on the bill, and everybody shows up,
The-
talks about how bad an operator they are, what was on the bills.
Well, I mean, they're all use on appeal, so even if they have, say there's a person that has, it'd be harder on larger acre tracts, we say they're right at the 2 acre threshold, it's a larger lot subdivision, and they have terrible operating, and all their neighbors come in when they request renewal, the board has every right to deny,
Exactly.
even though they meet the standards, because.
The
it's
only
use
time the
on
board
appeal.
has no right is if they predate, I think it's May of 2018. If they predate May of 2018, same ownership, and they can prove they rented it out prior to that, and they paid taxes or whatever, and they did not, and I'm talking about the state taxes. And the only thing that disqualifies them is if they have, I think, 3 felonious instances of or 3 instances of felonious activity, then they can be disqualified from that protection.
Yes, and even
They
then.
fall under local authority.
Well, based on that, I'm looking to approve it as written.
Second.
Got a motion and a second, further discussion. No further discussion, all in favor, say aye. Opposed, nay. Motion passed. Can we just discuss a little bit more about the 25-100 a little, and tell us who's changing and what the benefit or what the drawback? is?
Well, my understanding is Lebanon may be asking for detention design to the 100-year storm. That's just based on conversation we've had with their engineer recently.
We talking about their status quo requirement?
Yes.
Is that not just a larger detention pond?
Sure.
Would be, yeah, it'd be
It's
bigger.
either deeper or wider, or both.
What else would it,
Huh?
what else would it be besides something to catch the water? Bigger basin?
Well, I mean, they can do subterranean or whatever. Like there are underground detention facilities. We don't see a lot of them.
I mean, Chick-fil-A has their detentions underground here in town.
Tom, you got an interest here. What's your thing?
I'm not smart enough to solve the problem.
I-
Yeah, I'm smart enough to see the problem.
I will tell you this, it's probably something that Urban Type would need to discuss because a lot of our design criterion is tied up in stormwater engineering.
I understand that, but even in suburban and rural, you got clusters of stuff that creates runoff that affects the neighbors. And that's a big thing I'd like to prevent if
Well-
possible.
What would be our option, Tom?
Bigger duck
The
pond.
way your option, I guess, would be either to leave it the way it is or to
Increase it.
to increase it. And the Corps of Engineers is supposed to come up on the Spencer Creek watershed with
Well, I thought
some suggestions of things we can do, and some of those will be Spencer Creek specific capital type projects, like, everybody talked about dredging the creek. The Corps not real happy on that because as soon as you dredge it, within 4 or 5 years, it fills back in. But there are other things like resizing bridges and pipes and stuff that would be capital type projects. But one of the other things they might propose would be, well, they might mention it in the Spencer Creek watershed, but you can consider countywide heightened standards in a particular circumstance or whatever.
What's wrong with going to the 100-year and that larger detention pond? Is other counties doing that?
The only one I'm aware of is Lebanon has, and this is all like informal, but informally talking to some of their engineering staff, they are requiring 100-year detention design with subdivision development. Now,
City of Lebanon.
city of Lebanon.
What other
No.
counties?
I do not know of any. Now, at least at present.
I think this is the city of Franklin too, but
Yes.
this was probably 4 years ago. Their minimum requirement was a 50-year storm event. This was 4 years ago. I don't know if they've changed
Right.
it since, but I mean, that's another city.
Um, no, I forgot what I was gonna say then.
What bothers me is years, you know, I'm probably older than anybody in this room, but years of memory of, you wanna say something, Mayor? Okay. That year, and all I remember, we'd have long, slow rains all summer long, off and on. Now it seems like we're having 5 mile across sail and it dumps 3 inches of water and everything in the neighborhood floods and runs off and floods the next neighborhood. And that's what concerns me. I don't know if you call it global warming or Amazon growing or what, you know,
Well,
but
without
it's
getting,
happening.
without getting off in a ditch
It's
arguing
happening.
about what's causing it, I think most people can agree that there is climate change, whether it's cyclical or
What-
man-made. doesn't
What
matter.
can we do to retain the water on the property, not let it run off into
Well,
something
the
else?
state has done some things. They've required the first inch of rainfall to be absorbed, on site in
Mhm.
every development. And then,
Presuming it doesn't come too fast.
right, and then secondly,
Well, then there's a lot of what he's warning.
right, but then secondly, we have the two through 25 year storm design that we currently designed for, along with safe passage of the 100-year storm. And I remember what I was gonna say a minute ago. I'll get to that in a minute, but the other thing that we require is, generally speaking, a 0% increase in pre to post development runoff. And what we're saying is, we may not be able to fix an existing drainage problem, but we try very hard to make sure the design does not exacerbate the problem. So there's that.
Well, what I'm thinking is future building,
I don't know.
future
Understand what
growth.
you're talking
You know,
about.
This,
if it rained on your property, you ought to keep it on your property, in my opinion.
you may not be able to answer this, Tom, but how much, if you went from 25 to 50 years, how much capacity would you increase? Do you have any
That's
way?
entirely dependent on how deep the detention pond is,
Well, I mean, but what's,
storage.
I mean, you're the one gonna make those requirements of your department, but
Uh-huh.
would you double it?
No,
Would you
no.
No,
triple
I
it?
don't think it would double it, but it
I
would.
mean, that's what I don't know how much you're.
Now, this is my gut, because I'm not
Mhm.
the mathematician here. You really need to be talking to our consulting engineer
Well, but what I'm
for
saying
that
is,
type of answer.
for
But
this type
you
of
are
question,
enlarging
you
it.
need to know how much you can gain, is what my question is
Sure.
leading to. I mean, do you go to 50 years, do you go to 100 years? I mean, lots of numbers.
As a layperson, if I remember right, it's like, and they're going in minutes, it's like a 20% increase or something like that. When you do.
Would it
But-
determine the size of the property too, though? I mean,
Sure.
Oh, yeah, everything.
so
I mean, it
it's
may-
probably a lot of
It
calculations.
may
that
require
go into
multiple
it.
lots, you know, it just depends on what's there, but.
And eventually the water's coming out there anyway.
Well, as I'm saying, if it reaches a certain point, it's gonna go back to leaving as quickly as it was.
Oh, what I was gonna say a minute ago before I forget again, is many of your developers now, particularly on rezoning requests, are coming in and voluntarily stating that they're gonna detain to the 100-year detention. We've had several of those, lately, both, some of which we've approved, some of which we've denied ultimately, but we've had several more recent proposals whereby the developer just came in right off the bat and said, we're gonna detain to we're not just gonna allow for safe passage, we're gonna detain to the 100-year storm.
I don't think we're doing our job if we don't increase something to keep the water on the property and not allow it to go to somebody else.
Well, there is discussion in the industry, and that's the other thing I can tell you about an increase. Most of the discussion I've heard, other than Lebanon, has been more along the lines of maybe going to a 50-year or a 75-year design storm. But, so those are, that's just amongst,
If we have another meeting, or
What's the
you
next one?
you won't be around, or Chris, whoever has the next meeting, whatever, would you get the engineer to come and
we can ask them, yeah.
and tell us what a 25 to 50 and a 50, 75, 100, what's the volume of capacity you have to hold?
Just
And that-
ballpark, how much more
Well, yeah.
land are you talking about?
Well, it's either more land or deeper.
Yeah.
bond, you know.
You know,
I
to,
mean,
you're probably, just for comparing apples to apples, you're probably gonna want to lay out a scenario like, we got a 100-acre tract with a 200-acre watershed or something that makes sense for Wilson County, and say, if you detain this 200 acres of watershed on this 100-acre tract with however many lots, with a
Stream
with a
runs.
25-year storm, the detention ponds have to have this much capacity. If it's a 50-year storm, they have to have this much capacity.
That's the question, that's the question.
Yeah. But I do think you're gonna wanna come up with some scenario that the engineer can shoot at. Give
Well,
them the three design
You
scenarios.
just mentioned scenario, and since I guess you're not leaving, are you? And your task was talking to the engineer and coming back with some. Bring Jerry and come
We
back
can
with
ask
some
them
answers
to
there.
come back and talk with you.
25-year increment jumps to 100 years.
UT did not offer me a job.
I'm sorry?
I said I did not get a job offer from UT.
Well, I'm sowing seed until cutting hay if you got something.
Hey, a name and likeness contract is still out there, man.
But seriously, guys, I think we need to, I think we need to explore this,
I think we do too.
so. Any other,
Yeah,
I got a
I got a
question, yeah,
question.
Bob.
Since you're not gonna be around for people to scream and holler at you anyway, from the public, what would the effect is if we just went ahead and Wilson County wide just stopped allowing anybody to build in the 100-year floodway at any elevation?
There are some, I'm
We have
aware,
talked about that.
yeah, we have talked about it. I am aware of some jurisdictions that do that.
Almost all of them now.
All of them prohibit construction in the floodway.
Everybody,
Not the
just about ready to floodway.
The only jurisdictions that I know that prohibited in the floodplain are much smaller jurisdictions.
Lawrence County and Lawrenceburg, I think, do that now.
Both are cities.
And, well, Lawrence County.
Lawrence
County.
I'm talking about Mount Juliet.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure
I
Lebanon does.
think Franklin does it. I don't.
You don't know of any counties.
But, I mean, if you did that, I mean, we can pass that policy, but if you do that in our county, you're taking entire parcels and deeming them unbuildable. Which, I mean, that's not,
But when you build in the floodplain, sure, you have to buy flood insurance and yeah, it's 2 feet, whatever elevation.
Yeah.
But you're changing the floodplain.
you are, yes,
And so people who are building up to the floodplain and staying out of the floodplain are being affected by something that is man-made that we're allowing, that they, by their best ability, got close to but didn't violate. Now they're being affected by it. That's what bothers me.
Uphill and upstream.
Yeah, I mean, and it alters your floodplain continuously. And how often do we study this
Well,
law?
It-
20, 30 years.
Especially Jerry telling us so, then you there.
Jared, yes, sir.
Once you set up a meeting, let's just get together, talk downstairs.
Just in the office.
Yeah, and then bring it back to the next meeting. So we got a good understanding, committee has a good understanding. Pardon?
I think 3 minutes, 2 minutes.
Huh?
2 minutes.
2 minutes what?
I'm going there.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Another motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Have